Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are diving headfirst into something that I know you're super curious about. The possible collapse of globalization as we know it.
Yes.
You've provided us with, wow, this just incredibly interesting mix of research and articles, and I'm really excited to unpack it all with you and see what we discover.
Me too.
It's going to be a journey, for sure.
Yeah.
We'll be connecting ancient history to, well, the future of food and everything in between.
Yeah, I love that.
We're talking about, get ready for kimchi quesadillas.
Yeah.
And the fragility of, well, the modern world, and even how playing cards might actually hold a clue to understanding how financial meltdowns happen. It's wild.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how much globalization really shapes everything about our lives,
Right.
in ways we often don't even realize.
Exactly.
So today we're going to be exploring those hidden connections and how changes on this global stage could really ripple through everything.
Yeah, to like the food we eat,
Yeah.
the tech we rely on, everything.
It's a big topic.
It's a huge topic. So let's maybe start with something super relatable. Imagine, you're craving a kimchi quesadilla.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds good.
Sounds delicious.
But think about it for a sec. That seemingly simple dish, it's a testament to this intricate just web of global trade that we're talking about.
Yeah.
You've got, tortillas from Mexico, potentially,
Right.
kimchi from Korea,
Of course.
cheese, maybe Wisconsin, maybe Vermont.
Yeah.
It's a global party on your plate.
Absolutely. And, don't forget the spices, too.
Oh, right, of course.
Cumin from India.
Ah,
Chili peppers from South America. That kimchi quesadilla is like a tiny little microcosm of these huge systems that we rely on, even just to get our basic needs met.
yeah. It's really incredible when you think about it like that.
Yeah.
But that interconnectedness also makes us vulnerable.
Right.
What happens if just one of those connections breaks down?
Mm.
What if a vital shipping route, like let's say the Strait of Malacca, is disrupted?
Yeah.
What happens then?
So Strait of Malacca is this super critical choke point in global trade. Just geographically, it's a very narrow passageway between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, and just a massive amount of the stuff that we trade globally, oil and manufactured goods and all kinds of things flows through there. So any kind of disruption, it could be piracy, it could be political conflict, even a natural disaster, any of those things could just send shockwaves through the whole system.
Wow.
And then we're talking delays, we're talking shortages, and probably huge price hikes on everything.
Globally.
Yeah, globally.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
If things are already this fragile, what happens as the American-led order weakens? What does that even mean? I know it's got something to do with global trade, but can you just break that down a little bit for me?
So the American-led order, it's kind of a set of, rules and institutions, basically, that emerged after World War II. And the U.S., with its, powerful Navy, the U.S. guaranteed the security of all of these global shipping lanes and basically promoted this idea of free trade globally. And that system, with the U.S. as the guarantor of it all, let even countries that are geographically disadvantaged, not so well situated for trade, it let them participate and experience this, pretty unprecedented economic growth.
So basically the U.S. was like the world's policeman,
In a sense, yeah.
keeping trade routes safe, making sure everyone was following the rules, and that allowed globalization to really take off, it sounds like.
Yeah, precisely. But as the influence of the U.S. globally maybe wanes a little bit, the security of those trade routes, it's not a given anymore. And this brings us back to these choke points like we were talking about, like the Strait of Malacca.
Right.
Increased competition for resources and for influence, especially with China's rise, could make those kinds of waterways, those really important waterways, could make them a flashpoint for conflict.
Right.
And then that further disrupts those fragile supply chains we were talking about.
Right.
And it's, yeah.
So those yummy kimchi quesadilla ingredients might become a lot harder to come by.
Yeah, they might.
And not to mention more expensive.
Right.
It feels like we've jumped from delicious food to potential international conflict pretty quickly.
I know it might seem like a jump, but it really underscores how interconnected these systems are. And, even just the history of transportation plays a huge role in in understanding how we got here.
Right.
For centuries, trade was really limited by human and animal power. Transportation was slow, it was expensive, and it was dangerous. But then came this series of innovations that changed everything.
I bet you're going to say the steam engine. I mean, I can already hear my high school history teacher.
Of course, the steam engine, I mean, the steam engine was a total game changer. It paved the way for railroads, steamships, and eventually the internal combustion engine. I mean, all of these things just drastically reduced the cost of transportation and made it possible to connect these distant parts of the world in a way that had never been possible before. Imagine, before container ships, the cost of shipping often was more than the value of the goods themselves.
So no kimchi quesadillas back then.
Probably not.
Right. But wait, but you just said that container ships were like a marvel of engineering. So it sounds like they're a big part of the problem too, though, right? I mean, isn't all this shipping, contributing to pollution and climate change? Isn't there a hidden cost to all this efficiency?
Yeah, you're absolutely right to raise that point. Container ships, while they really have revolutionized global trade, they have come with a big environmental price tag.
Right.
I mean, they're so big and they require huge amounts of fuel, and so they contribute a lot to greenhouse gas emissions. Plus, the sheer volume of goods moving around the globe, that's just increased demand for resources and energy, which makes the environmental concerns even worse.
Right.
So it's a complex equation.
So even our kimchi quesadilla, as delicious as it is, it represents this complex equation of costs and benefits, not just financial, but environmental as well.
Absolutely.
Which makes me wonder what happens when the cost of all this shipping it starts to outweigh the benefits. What happens then?
That's where it gets interesting. We're already seeing a shift. Shipping costs are going up due to a lot of different factors. There's geopolitical instability, and then there's this growing urgency to do something about climate change.
Right.
And so, yeah, the end of cheap transportation is a major factor driving this potential collapse of globalization we keep talking about.
Okay, so hold on. We need to unpack that a little bit. What exactly is driving up these costs, and how does that tie into this whole globalization unraveling thing?
Okay, so one major factor is that weakening of the American-led order we were talking about.
Right.
As that system kind of weakens, the security of those global shipping lanes becomes less certain. It becomes more expensive to insure those routes, and it makes them potentially more vulnerable to disruptions, to things going wrong.
Right.
And then you add to that the rising cost of fuel, which is, being driven in part by conflict in key energy-producing regions, like the Persian Gulf.
Right.
And you've got this recipe for much higher shipping costs.
Yeah. Okay, so higher shipping costs, they're kind of pushing us, it seems, towards a deglobalized world where things are produced and consumed more locally.
Right.
But what about the financial side of all of this? Whenever I hear someone say monetary policy or fiat currency, my brain just wants to shut down.
Yeah, I hear you.
Help me understand how this all ties into this potential collapse of globalization.
Okay, well, those terms can sound intimidating.
Yeah.
But they have a huge impact on our lives, especially as this global landscape shifts. So think back to our kimchi quesadilla.
Okay.
All those ingredients traveling the world, it's all part of this complex dance choreographed by this global financial system.
Right.
And it's that system that lets countries trade with each other using currencies that we all kind of agree hold value.
So remind me, how does this global financial system work? I mean, we all agree that dollars and euros and yen have value, but what backs them up? I vaguely remember something about gold, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Yeah, you're right. Things have definitely changed.
Okay.
We've moved away from the gold standard and into this world of fiat currency. And that means that currencies today aren't backed by some physical commodity like gold, but by the trust and credit of the government that issues it.
Oh.
So essentially a dollar is worth a dollar because we all just believe it's worth a dollar.
Okay, that sounds a little shaky to me. I mean, what happens if people lose faith in a particular currency, and how does this all connect back to the collapse of globalization?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. You see, the fiat currency system, while it's made global trade possible, it's also led to just unprecedented levels of debt.
Right.
Governments and individuals, they've been able to borrow more easily, which has fueled, short-term economic growth, but it's also created these long-term risks.
So if things start, going south economically as globalization unwinds, could people just lose faith in those currencies? Could we actually see like a currency collapse?
It's a real concern. I mean, as globalization unravels and countries become, more inwardly focused, the stability of that whole global financial system could be really tested.
Hmm.
Investors might lose confidence in certain currencies, and that could lead to rapid sell-offs and potentially trigger a whole cascade of currency collapses.
Okay, this is starting to sound like a financial thriller movie.
Hmm.
But what would the real world consequences of something like that, of a currency collapse, be?
Well, you could see bank failures, stock market crashes, and this widespread loss of confidence in the whole financial system. I mean, this isn't just theoretical. I mean,
Okay.
we saw this during the Asian financial crisis back in the late 90s.
Right.
And as globalization keeps, straining under all this weight, rising costs and these demographic shifts and geopolitical tensions, a similar crisis, potentially on an even larger scale, could definitely unfold.
So if the global financial system is built on a foundation of trust, and that trust starts to crumble, I mean, it could bring the whole house of cards down. But if it's that vulnerable, why haven't we seen more currency collapses?
Well, the American-led order, for all its, flaws, it did play a big role in stabilizing the global financial system.
Hmm.
The U.S. dollar became the world's reserve currency,
Right.
and that provided a certain degree of stability and predictability. But as, the role of the U.S. diminishes, the system just becomes more vulnerable to shocks, more vulnerable to disruptions.
It seems like we're facing a perfect storm here.
Yeah.
Rising shipping costs are already putting all this pressure on global trade, and now we have to worry about the stability of the entire financial system. What can we do to prepare for these kinds of financial risks?
Well, that's a question on everybody's mind these days.
Yeah.
Diversifying your assets is really crucial. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, as the
Right.
saying goes. Right.
Consider holding some gold or other precious metals as a hedge against inflation and currency fluctuations.
Hmm.
Investing in real estate or other tangible assets that could also offer some protection.
So we're talking about building a portfolio that's more resilient to global uncertainty, one that doesn't just rely on traditional investments like stocks and bonds.
Exactly. The investment landscape is changing, and we need to change our strategies to adapt.
Mhm.
As globalization recedes, tangible assets and alternative investments, they might offer more stability than things that are tied to these potentially volatile global markets.
It's a lot to consider,
It is.
but it sounds like, being proactive and informed is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's maybe shift gears for a moment and talk about something a little bit more tangible, uh, energy. How will the end of globalization impact, our access to energy, especially considering how reliant we are on those global supply chains that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, that's a really important point. Globalization has made the world incredibly dependent on just a few key energy producers.
Hmm.
And they're, primarily in the Persian Gulf and the former Soviet Union. Those brightly colored maps we've all seen, the ones with all the arrows crisscrossing the globe, showing where the oil flows.
Yeah.
Those really highlight how vulnerable our energy supply chains are.
So it's not just about, the price of the pump anymore.
No, it's much bigger than that.
Are we talking about potential conflict, over resources? Could those energy producing regions become like flashpoints in a deglobalized world?
Yeah, absolutely. As the American-led order weakens, those carefully choreographed energy flows, they're not guaranteed anymore. And so competition for access to those dwindling resources, it could really intensify. And
Mm.
and that could potentially lead to conflict, to instability in those strategically important regions.
Right.
Imagine a scenario where access to oil from the Persian Gulf is disrupted.
Right.
I mean, we're talking skyrocketing energy prices,
Hmm.
economic turmoil globally.
Yeah. That's that's a sobering thought. It seems like everything is connected. But what about the transition to renewable energy? I mean, isn't that supposed to be the solution to all this,
Hmm.
to our energy woes and our dependence on these volatile regions? Won't solar panels and wind turbines, won't they save the day?
Renewable energy will play a big role in the future. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But it's not a magic bullet,
Yeah.
right? There are some challenges we need to address before we can rely just on renewables. For one thing, solar and wind power, they're intermittent.
Right.
The sun isn't always shining, the wind isn't always blowing.
Right.
So we need reliable backup systems to make sure there's a consistent energy supply, and those often still rely on fossil fuels.
Hmm.
It's a transition.
Right.
It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Right. So even if we cover every rooftop with solar panels, we will still need a reliable backup plan,
Yeah.
at least for now.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But what about the environmental impact of renewable energy? I've read that, that electric vehicles, for example, might not be as green as we think.
Hmm.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Okay.
While electric vehicles themselves don't, produce emissions when you're driving them,
Yeah.
their overall environmental impact is more complex than that. Producing those electric vehicle batteries, particularly in countries like China that rely heavily on coal-powered grids, that's energy intensive and can have a pretty big carbon footprint.
So it's not just about switching to electric cars.
Right.
It's about where those cars and where those components are produced.
Exactly.
And what energy sources are used to produce them.
Yeah.
It seems like we're back to that web of interconnectedness again.
We are. It's all connected. The shift to a more sustainable energy future, it really requires a holistic approach.
Mhm.
It's not just about the technology itself, it's about the whole system
Right.
of production, distribution, consumption, all of it.
Okay, so we've talked about energy,
Right.
but what about all the other materials that make our modern world possible? I mean, things like lithium for batteries or rare earth elements for electronics.
Yeah.
I mean, are those resources at risk, as globalization declines?
You've raised another really crucial issue there. Globalization has it's masked the uneven distribution of a lot of critical materials,
Mhm.
and the end of cheap transportation that could really expose those vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
We're talking about materials like cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements.
Right.
They're all essential for modern technology, but they're all really concentrated in just a few specific regions of the world.
So as countries start to prioritize their own needs and resources become more scarce, could we see this scramble for these materials? Could this lead to more conflict, more instability in those regions?
It's a real concern. Imagine cobalt. It's essential for those electric vehicle batteries we were talking about.
Yeah.
But it's primarily mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country that's been plagued by conflict and political instability.
Right.
Or lithium, which is crucial for batteries of all kinds, but it's found in these large quantities in South America. These regions, they could easily become flashpoints as nations start to kind of jostle for control over these increasingly valuable resources.
It seems like every thread we pull on just leads to this tangled web of interconnected challenges. It's a lot to take in.
It is. It's a lot.
But you've given us a lot to think about. Before we dive into, the final part of our deep dive and explore what all this means for American manufacturing, I want to pause for a second and just ask you, what are your thoughts so far? What's resonating with you as we explore this complex topic? We've covered so much ground. It's really, really interesting. From kimchi, quesadillas, to currency collapses. And it's clear that, this potential end of globalization as we know it paints a pretty complex and honestly kind of daunting picture.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to revisit something you mentioned earlier, this possibility of a resurgence in American manufacturing.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really a viable scenario in a world that's becoming, increasingly fragmented?
It might seem counterintuitive, but the U.S. is actually surprisingly well positioned, not just to survive, but to potentially thrive in a deglobalized world. It has this really unique combination of advantages that few other countries have.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Remind me, what are those advantages that could give the U.S. an edge in this new landscape?
Okay, well, let's start with geography. I mean, the U.S. has just vast amounts of arable land, diverse climates that are perfect for a huge range of crops, and then abundant natural resources like oil and natural gas and timber. This means it's a lot less reliant on imports for food, for energy, and for raw materials than a lot of other countries are.
So it's like having this giant safety net in a world where those essential resources they're becoming so scarce and so contested.
Exactly, but it's not just about having the resources. It's
Hmm.
about the infrastructure to access and utilize them.
Hmm.
The U.S. has this really well-developed network of roads and railways and waterways that can move all those goods and all those people within its borders.
Right. That makes sense. But what about, manufacturing specifically? I mean, we talked about how complex, how interconnected these global supply chains are.
Right.
Can the U.S. really compete if it's trying to do everything itself?
Well, it's not about going it alone. It's more about strategically, reshoring or nearshoring key industries
Hmm.
and building more regionalized supply chains. And this is where Mexico comes in as a really crucial partner.
Right. You mentioned NAFTA before.
Yeah.
So the U.S. and Mexico could like team up and create this more integrated, more resilient manufacturing ecosystem here in North America.
Exactly. Mexico has this large, relatively young workforce, and its proximity to the U.S. makes it logistically just a really attractive place for manufacturing.
Right.
And this partnership, it really could create a win-win scenario, right? Companies could lower their labor costs but still have access to the U.S. market, and Mexico could benefit from increased investment and job creation.
That sounds pretty promising, but wouldn't automation eventually make that wage differential less important? Won't robots and AI just take over all those manufacturing jobs anyway?
Automation will definitely play a big role in the future of manufacturing. There's no doubt about that.
Mm,
But even the most highly automated factories still need skilled workers to design, to build, to operate, to maintain those complex systems. And the U.S. has a really strong foundation in STEM,
right.
science, technology, engineering, and mathematics,
Right.
which are crucial for supporting a more advanced and automated manufacturing sector.
So we're not just talking about recreating, the low wage, low skill manufacturing jobs of the past.
Right.
This is about a new era of manufacturing,
Yeah.
and one that's driven by technology, by innovation, and requires a skilled workforce.
Absolutely. It's about creating a whole new generation of manufacturing jobs that are higher paying, that are higher skilled and more sustainable. It's about leveraging technology to create this more competitive and more resilient manufacturing base that can really thrive in a deglobalized world.
It's a really interesting vision for the future of American manufacturing.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of the world? If the U.S. and Mexico are doing well in this scenario, does that mean that everyone else is going to struggle?
It's not necessarily a zero-sum game, but there will be winners and losers in this transition. Countries that are really reliant on exports and that are really embedded in those complex global supply chains that we've been talking about, they're likely to face more significant challenges. I mean, we've already talked about the potential for economic instability, for resource scarcity, and even conflict in those regions.
Right, right. So for our listeners and really for all of us, this begs the question: what does this all mean for the average person? How should we be thinking about our own lives and careers in light of all of this?
Well, I think it underscores the importance of adaptability and lifelong learning. The jobs of the future, especially in a deglobalized world, they're likely to require a very different set of skills than the jobs of the past.
Mm.
The ability to learn new things quickly, to be flexible and adaptable. That's going to be increasingly valuable.
So instead of specializing in one narrow field,
Yeah.
we need to become more well-rounded, more like uh, intellectual Swiss Army knives, I guess you could say, ready to tackle whatever challenges come our way.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it's not just about, job skills.
Right.
We also need to be thinking about how to make our communities more resilient.
Hmm.
This could mean supporting local businesses, investing in renewable energy, strengthening those social safety nets that we might need to rely on more in a world that's less globally interconnected.
It sounds like preparing for a deglobalized world. It means thinking local, building strong communities, and being prepared to learn and adapt as the world changes around us.
Yeah, exactly. And while it might seem daunting, this shift also presents this opportunity to create a world that's more resilient, that's more sustainable, that's more equitable, a world where we prioritize those local needs, we build stronger communities, and we really focus on creating a future that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
That's a really powerful and hopeful message.
Hmm.
As we wrap up this deep dive into this potential collapse of globalization,
Hmm.
what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to ponder?
Well, the world is changing. There's no doubt about that. And the old rules of globalization, they're no longer a given. The future is uncertain, but it's not predetermined. We have the power to shape that future,
Hmm.
to create a world that is more just, that is more sustainable, and ultimately more resilient.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly complex but fascinating topic. And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring. The future is ours to shape.
Loved this video? Smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And don't forget to order the book, link below.